Welcome to the Plant Fit Summit, bringing you the best in plant-based health and fitness. This is Luke and Toby. Today we have Charlie Engle. Charlie is an ultramarathon runner, an adventure seeker, a global explorer, and philanthropist. He's also a recovering crack addict, a convicted felon, turned author, and inspirational speaker. We start the conversation with Charlie sharing about how to overcome adversity. Enjoy the presentation.
And I always say that I think I'm the most prepared person ever for something like COVID because quite frankly, adversity is welcome in my world. And I'm certainly not advocating for having COVID or something like that, but it's been my real belief for pretty much my whole adult life that the more often I can put myself into a position to face some real adversity, the more lessons I'm going to learn and the better I'm going to be. And it's funny. I always say that I'm not sure when comfort became a goal for people, but it's not a good goal because nothing is ever learned from a comfortable life. And everyone, if they're honest, I think would admit that the best lessons they've ever learned have come from the most difficult things that they've faced. So to avoid hardship, first of all, is impossible. So if we welcome it, even something like COVID, which in full disclosure, you may not know this, but my wife and I have both had COVID-19. And so we've been dealing with this from not just a metaphorical standpoint, but a literal standpoint, because we've both been sick. We're mostly well at this point, but I've had firsthand experience of what, not just being locked down, but also the experience of having COVID.
Maybe we could go into that. What was the experience like for you?
Well, first of all, so my wife has some underlying conditions. You know, she was a former professional beach volleyball player and former pro cyclist, really high-end athlete, and but she's had cancer a couple of times, and consequently, her immune system is pretty suppressed, and so we're very careful. We always are careful, and all the way back in March when this really began in earnest here in the United States, you know, I was like the only guy in the grocery store wearing, you know, a mask and wearing gloves, and people looked at me like I was crazy. And you know, I was just being safe because I knew I didn't want my wife to get sick. And somehow it still happened. We still to this day don't know how, if it was from, you know, a delivery, or, you know, there was one incident where I exchanged cars with a friend of mine and he got sick also. So my suspicion is that it was probably, we didn't see each other, but, you know, he dropped off a car and I got in the car. And so I think that that's possible. But anyway, the point is, you know, we both had severe stomach upset and headaches, and extreme exhaustion, and that lasted several days and then actually got better, and we didn't think that much of it. I mean, we had a couple of days of recovery, and then my wife really took a downturn and she had a lot of trouble breathing, and ultimately we ended up at the emergency room, and she was there for a day and tested. And we were able to go home, thankfully. And, you know, a few days later, the test came back positive. And, you know, we've just, you know, we're both, I mean, the good news is we're both really healthy. I mean, despite my wife's underlying condition, she's a very healthy person. And, you know, we're both plant-based. She has been for pretty much 30 years or more. And, you know, so we eat a really good diet. We take good care of ourselves. And I think that that's helped us recover very quickly.
Really want to dive into prior to COVID, even way before, and, you know, when the dark times in your life, because I know you have quite a story, and a downward spiral into depression. Maybe you could tell us where you were before.
Yeah, you know, and I'll keep it brief, but in short, my story is, I started off pretty, I mean, I would say fairly normal, except unbeknownst to me, I was a fourth generation addict, alcoholic. I had a lot of addiction in my family. And, I had my high school years and I was the captain of all the teams, and I made good grades, and I was like the student body president, and I did all the things you're supposed to do. And then I went to college, and at university in North Carolina, I found out pretty quickly that I was pretty average. And everybody, there were 4,000 other new students, and everybody had good grades and played sports. And I for some reason, I started to drink more, and I think I was a little depressed, and wasn't well prepared for university. And for me, what that meant was, my image actually began to revolve around drinking and partying and that kind of thing. And it was just, especially with my genetics, it just ended up being something that I had a very hard time quitting. And without, because all the details aren't that important, but just suffice it to say, I spent 12 years really battling drugs and alcohol and having a hard time finding my way out of that. And I was always the top salesperson at my company, at my job. I was running marathons, but then I would spend 3 months drinking, and then I would stop drinking and I would run, and it was just this crazy thing. And when I was 29, my first son was born. And I had tried to quit drinking many, many times. I'd gone to a treatment center, and I'd gone to AA meetings, and I'd gone to church, and anything you could think of I had tried, and nothing had ever really worked. And I thought that just my son being born would really change everything, just magically. And for a little while it worked, because I felt responsible for this person, and love and acceptance and all of this was very important. And as an addict, I really thought that I was broken, and that I wasn't entitled to have those feelings. And so my son was going to be the person that would save me, basically. He didn't know that, of course, but and for a couple of months, I did pretty well. And then I had a really terrible episode, and I found myself for 6 days drinking and doing drugs and just killing myself. And, the end of that binge was me sitting on the ground watching the police search my car. And, there's bullet holes in my car. And, I knew, even after being awake for 6 days and having my head be very fuzzy, I had a very clear thought, and that's that, my son can't save me. Like, nobody's going to save me. Like, I'm the only person that can save me. And that day I made a commitment, and I realized I either had to, I was going to live or I was going to die. And it was my choice. And I went to an AA meeting that night, and the next morning I put on my running shoes and I started to run. And for the next 3 years, I did those two things every day. I went to a meeting and I went for a run for 3 years without missing a single day. And, and I started to build a life, and running really saved my life. And then it actually gave me a life.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something that really, really perked my curiosity. You said you felt like you were broken. Why did you feel that way?
Yeah, I mean, I was ashamed, I was ashamed of the person I was. And uh, when you do enough things that you feel ashamed of, and you feel like a failure, and like you're not good enough, like babies don't know that. My son didn't know anything about that. So I see this little baby and I can feel the love coming from him. And before then, I just felt like I wasn't deserving. Like I didn't deserve anything good because I wasn't doing it. In my view, I wasn't a good person. Like doing drugs and drinking made me a bad person, which isn't true, but that's how I felt at the time. You know, the drinking and the drugs are separate from the person that's in here. And you know, but if you do it often enough, you wake up every morning and you feel terrible and you feel like a failure. And that's how I felt. And having this baby that didn't know any of that, and he's just looking at me with this love and acceptance. It changed everything, and it did make me know that I wanted to make a change. And I think the problem is, and what I love to tell people is that I spent so many years looking for something outside of me to save me, whether it was a person, so either in the form of relationships, or if I could just be the top salesman, or I could buy a house, or I could buy a car, or I could run a marathon. Like clearly I'm successful, like I don't have a problem. And that's not the way it works. You know, success and fulfillment and feeling proud and good of yourself only comes from here. It's not about what you accomplish. It's about who you feel like in here. And it just took me a long time to figure that out.
So, for someone that's listening right now who may be suffering from addiction, whether it's food addiction, alcohol addiction, or drug addiction, what would you say to this person that's struggling right now?
Yeah, you know, it's so based in shame, and you don't have to feel ashamed of yourself because it's not, you know, what you do is not who you are. And so that can change. And so it's important to reach out. I mean, we hear this all the time, but but it really just takes making that first step towards recovery and recognizing that you're not broken, you're not worthless. You know, you have great value. And I like to tell it this way, Luke. uh, you know, when I was running for those first 3 years, every single day I ran so hard that like I almost like threw up. Like I felt like I wanted to like beat the addict out of me. And if I could take a knife and I could like cut that part of me out, I wanted to get rid of it because it felt like that was the part that was killing me, right? Because you know, I just couldn't stop drinking and doing drugs. So if I could get rid of that part, I'd be okay. Well, what I finally understood during those 3 years is that the addict, my obsessive nature, is actually all the best parts of me. Like if I didn't have that part of me, I wouldn't be good at anything. Like but I had to take my power, my superpower, as my wife said. I had to take my power, which is addiction, and point it to valuable things. So I had to find a way to use that energy that I had towards positive things and to cut myself a break too. I can't, you know, nobody is perfect. Like I don't drink and I don't do drugs, and it's been almost 28 years for me now. So, you know, I'm proud of that, but that doesn't mean that I'm not an asshole sometimes. And it doesn't mean that I'm not, you know, that I don't do things that I'm not proud of, or say, you know, doesn't make me perfect, but it means that I'm willing to continue to work to be better. So I encourage people to find that path. The number one thing, and I always say it, I say it all the time, it's what I call attraction rather than promotion. You know, find someone, whoever you are, find someone out there in the world that you admire, and you watch how they live their lives, and you do what they do. You know, you try to emulate what they're doing. And you don't know everything about that person. Nobody's perfect, but you know, whether it's diet and nutrition, or not drinking, or using therapy. I mean, I see a therapist regularly. I go to AA meetings even after 28 years because I'm not, this is a process. And, I'd never want to stop learning how to be a better person.
You really mentioned a good point there about transmuting that addiction to really a strength, commitment, drive, focus. And I think for people like myself, I consider myself stubborn. I used to be stubborn. I'm a bull, I'm a Taurus, but I've transmuted that into commitment, the drive, to focus as well. So I think it's really transitioning that negative kind of force and just really shifting the focus, and you can really overcome so much. And where running is concerned, what I find that's really interesting is that is running a pathway for a cure to a certain degree for addiction, because I know of many ultra endurance athletes who suffered like you before, and rest in peace. I mean, I heard the story about Dave Clark as well. It was just really, really sad. Maybe you could share a little bit about your journey with Dave and why potentially running could be the pathway to healing.
Yeah, I mean, Dave's story, for those who don't know, is you should look him up. David Clark, ultra runner. He was only 49 years old, and he passed away a few days ago, just from complications from a surgery. He had a back surgery, and he used to be really big. Like, he was 320 pounds, and I didn't know him back in those days, but he was like this successful businessman, but really unhealthy, and ate a terrible diet and drank and did drugs. And, and he turned his life around. And for more than 18 years, he was clean and sober. And he became one of the more well-known ultra runners in the United States anyway. And, and I think his transformation, because it's so visual, like when you saw David, I mean, he lost half of his body weight. He was 320 pounds and he ended up at like 160. And it was shocking when you understand where he came from. And he wrote a couple of books. His latest book actually just came out right before he passed away. But his first book, it's interesting. We talked about books a lot in writing, and I believe in what David and I both believe in, and I think this is important, is sharing the struggle. Because especially today with social media, with the way people tell stories, very often they're telling positive stories. And I get that. People want to tell super positive stories, this is how you do it, and you got to be strong and all this. But you know what? We don't feel that way all the time. Nobody does. And so I believe sort of in sharing positive stories, but I believe in this philosophy, and David did too, of sharing the struggle. If you want to really welcome people into your world, then you have to share the struggle part of it. You have to share when you're having a bad day or when things aren't, great. And David did a good job. And I'll tell one brief story. So David and I did a run together. I had this idea to do something called the Icebreaker Run. And this was just 4 years ago. Right now, actually, today we would have been together crossing the United States from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., 6 of us, all recovering drug addicts, running across the United States. So we ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 24 straight days across the United States. And it was called the Icebreaker Run. And it was to bring attention to the need for more mental health services, because people need, they need somebody to talk to. That's what every study shows this. If you have an opportunity to actually talk about what's going on with you with another human being, it gets better. And I think David and I both believe that. And I think it's a strong way, whatever it is you're trying to change, whether it's eating habits, whether it's drinking and drugs, whether it's relationship problems, whether it's job problems. Like, everybody's got problems, but in a different package. And you need someone to be able to talk to.
Indeed, it's just about knowing that you're not alone, and you're never alone. It's just about putting your hand up and reaching out and saying that, hey, I need help. Very, very powerful stuff, Charlie. Going into your run, I mean, I know that you did a few epic feats, and there's a whole list of epic feats you've done. But for the first one, I'd like to get into is running the Sahara. So maybe do tell us about, for the audience that don't know what that was about. Why did you decide to do that?
Yeah, I mean, running the Sahara changed everything for me, and I'll keep it short, but people should also know, and I'm not trying to sell books, but if you want the whole story, my book, Running Man, is pretty much available everywhere. And um, so I ran, as I said, for those 3 years, and I ran really hard. And during that time, I ran 30 marathons or more, and I began to learn how to run. I mean, really learn how to run and to understand the value of suffering. I always tell people that, anybody you ask, what's the thing that has shaped who you are more than anything else? Everyone will choose. It might not be a marathon. Maybe it's the death of a friend or family member, or the loss of a relationship or something. In other words, everybody will point to something that was difficult. And so I decided, okay, since the best lessons come from the most difficult things, and I had learned a lot of lessons from running, why don't I see just how far I can run? I want to know, how far can I actually go? So I started to run 50 miles, and then I ran 100 miles, and then I ran races that were hundreds of miles across the jungles of Borneo and Vietnam, and I went to the Amazon jungle, and I ran across the Gobi Desert in China and the Atacama Desert in Chile, and I just continued to do these. Some of them were races, some of them were just expeditions, but I wanted to see how far I could go and what more I could learn. I also love culture. I say that I'm a cultural explorer. I love to race, I love to run, but it's really about encountering other people and seeing what their culture is like, and eating their food, as long as it's not meat, and doing some, really experiencing what they experience. Well, all of that led me to the Amazon jungle, doing a race, and a guy just said to me, a friend of mine, a guy that, I mean, actually is a friend, but I had just met him. He was in the race. He said, I wonder if anybody's ever run across the Sahara Desert. And I looked at him and I was like, well, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Like, why would anybody do that? And you'd have to be an idiot to even try. And of course, because I'm an idiot, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so I went home and I started to do some research, and I actually found out that no one had ever run all the way across the Sahara Desert before. And firsts in the adventure world are really hard to come by. It's difficult to find something that no one has done before. And I began to just tell people that I was going to be the first person to run across the Sahara. And I don't think I even thought it was possible. Like, I don't know what I thought, but I liked this idea of saying out loud, I wanted to become the first person. And, there's an old saying in the book called The Alchemist, which is by, Paulo Coelho. And anyway, the whole idea behind that is, if you want something, if you really want it, the universe will conspire, to help you get it. And, you have to pay attention and you have to do the hard work. But anyway, I was working as a TV producer at the time. I was working in television for a television show called Extreme Makeover Home Edition. And for many years, and I knew this guy, and he introduced me to a director named James Mall, and James Mall had won the Academy Award for the best documentary a few years before, and I got a chance to meet James Mall, and I told him about this idea. I said, I want to run across the Sahara. It's almost 5,000 miles, and it's hot, and it's all sand, and there's native Tuaregs, and nobody's ever done it before. And he's like, yeah, I want to go. Let's do this. And but I still didn't take it seriously, to be honest. I mean, I actually didn't think the likelihood of this happening was very high. But he called me a week later and he said, "Hey, look, I just spoke with Matt Damon, and Matt Damon would like to be the executive producer of this project, and he wants to be the narrator of the film." And I remember he asked, he's like, "Would that be okay with you?" And I actually I hesitated for a second, and I said I was really hoping for somebody better, but yeah, that Matt Damon would be fine. And so now I have 2 Academy Award winners attached to this project, and now I have to figure out how to do it. And if you flash forward from there a year, I'm there at the coast in Senegal on the east coast, I mean, on the west coast of the Sahara Desert. And I have 2 other runners, a Taiwanese friend of mine, Kevin Lin, and my friend Ray Zahab from Canada. And we're getting ready to start this journey of running almost 5,000 miles across the Sahara. And everybody's very excited, ready to go, and fired up. And all I can think is that I have suckered all of these people to the Sahara Desert, and we're all going to die. So we did get started. I don't know how much of the story you want, but we did finally get started.
Oh, it's fascinating, isn't it? And it just goes to show how human you are, because you get Matt Damon, you get 2 Academy Award winners, and you feel like you're kind of bluffing everyone. You have this sense of imposter syndrome. It's like, I don't actually know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to do it anyway. And I think that is key, because most people just give themselves a 1,001 excuses why they can't succeed, but you just made the decision and say, we'll see what happens. And 4,600 miles later, you live to tell the tale. And when you were running, maybe we could go into just like a few moments when you were in the Sahara. Were there any moments during that race where you feared your safety or even your sanity?
And I love what you said a second ago, and I do want to take one quick step back. People think that they can't relate to me when it comes to this kind of running. But I always remind people that if you've ever started a business, or you have a family, or you've done the same thing, because we sort of pretend like we know what we're doing. And maybe you've got a great idea for a business, right? And it's a great idea, but you have to do all the little, most of us don't know what we're doing until we start doing it. And then you learn. And the same with being a parent. I always tell this very brief story about a friend of mine who was getting ready to have, he and his wife were having a kid, and he's like, "Oh my God, my other friends, they have 10-year-olds, and like they don't know what to do, and their kids are a pain." And like, I'm like, "Man, don't worry. You have to know how to take care of a baby. You don't have to worry about taking care of a 10-year-old. They don't come out 10 years old." Thankfully, they just come out little babies, and you get to learn along with them. And so my run across the Sahara was very much like that, because we were very excited. But 7 days into this run, Luke, we had fallen apart. Like, it was 140 degrees ground temperatures every day. So I don't know what that is Celsius, probably 45. Or something. It was crazy. And it was, we got lost in sandstorms, and we ran out of food, and we ran out of water. And this is only 1 week. Like, and we almost have to stop, because things had just gotten out of control, and it was not going well. And I realized at that time that I was so focused in my mind on getting to the finish. Like, I had been dreaming about this for so long, and I thought about, getting to the other side of the Sahara. And I realized that, just like with being clean and sober, and we all know the saying, one day at a time, just like being clean and sober, that what I needed to focus on was what I was doing today, and stop worrying about all the other things, and focus on today's problems. And if I could get through those, then I would have a chance to do it again tomorrow. And so when I got up on day 8, all I thought about was running a marathon in the morning. And then I got to lunch and I took a little break, and I thought about in the afternoon running a second marathon. And that's all I focused on was what those miles. And I love to say, you can only run the miles that are right in front of you. That's the only thing you can do. And at the end of the day, I would go to sleep and I would look up at the stars, and I would just be grateful for the fact that I had a chance to be out there suffering and learning and having this experience. And slowly but surely, we made our way all the way across the Sahara Desert. And I will tell you one other brief story that I think is important. About halfway across the Sahara, so this is 4,600 miles, and we're running 2 marathons every single day. And if you ever see the film Running the Sahara, I'm not the nicest guy sometimes. I'm really trying to push people because it's hard. And there are times when my teammates want to quit and where it just doesn't seem possible. And so in the halfway point, we reached a town called Agadez, which was in Niger. And if you look at the Sahara Desert, it's right in the middle. I mean, right in the middle. And the next country was Libya. And Libya at this point had not given us permission to enter their country. They hadn't said no, but they also hadn't said yes. And the United Nations was involved, and so we're now at this town at the halfway point, and we still have 300 miles to go to reach Libya. And my teammates decided they wanted to quit. And, and I understand their reasoning, but they were just saying, we can't go into Libya, from Agadez, we can leave and we can go home, and we did our best, and, we should be proud that we made it halfway. And I mean, I won't use the language that I used, but I basically said, okay, that's fine. You guys quit right now if you want to, but I'm going. And I'm going to take, that camel, and I'm going to take those Snickers bars, and I'm going to go to, Libya. And if I reach Libya and they turn me away, I can live with that, right? Because I would have gone as far as I could possibly go. That's as far as I could go, and I could live the rest of my life knowing that I had done my best. But if I leave now, I have no idea what they're going to say. And I couldn't live the rest of my life knowing that I had stopped before finding out. And I think it's a really good lesson, for all of us, because you can't control the outcome. You can only control your effort. And if you make the effort to go do things, even if it seems like getting a job, right? There are job interviews that people go on and they're like, I'm not going to get this job. There's no way, because I'm not qualified. But you don't know. Go and have the experience and see what happens. And so, of course, when we got about 2 days away from getting to Libya, the Libyan government finally said yes. And we were able to go in, and we continued on, and we made it all the way to the end, over 4,600 miles. And I want to say one other thing about the experience. I started something with Matt Damon called H2O Africa. And today, we raised about $6 million during the run. But today, H2O Africa is called water.org. And water.org is the world's largest clean water nonprofit. And we have funding today of about $1.2 billion. And, and it came from this run across the Sahara Desert, this crazy idea that, I didn't have any intention of, I hoped something good would come, but I didn't know what. And so I always remind people, just do it. Whatever it is, just do it and start your nonprofit or your foundation or help someone else, and something good will come out of it.
Like you said earlier, the universe will conspire if you take action and just take the necessary steps to move one foot forward at a time. I mean, I used the example of this summit when I wanted to do this summit with my co-hosts, and we had our first interview. It was like, oh my goodness, like what's a summit? And 4 years later, hundreds of interviews later, here we are chatting. So it's about taking that first step. So I fully understand that. So that's incredible. So I want to just kind of dive into post running with the Sahara. From what I understand, it wasn't all smooth sailing post running the Sahara. Maybe we could go into that.
Yeah, well, so I mean, for me, when I finished, I got to go on the Jay Leno show. I got to go, on NPR, and all the magazines were interviewing me, and the morning shows. And I had always been a public speaker, but now I had an agent, and I got all these opportunities, and it was really great. I was really enjoying it. I started planning my next expedition, a run across the United States. I was trying to set a new record for the fastest run across the U.S. And that actually didn't. I shot another film, and I was unsuccessful. Like, I had an injury, and it was really difficult. But but that's part of life, and you just keep going. So, but then something happened that really changed everything for me, and I was having a lot of success, and life was good. And I came home one day. I was just out running errands, and I came back to my home. I got out of the car, and I could see off to the side some movement. And it turned out to be six federal agents from the U.S. That placed me under arrest, put me in a car, and took me to jail. And where I stayed overnight, and I had no idea what was going on. And it's a very complicated story, but the simplest version of it is, because it's, to me, it's not worth getting into all the details. But in short, a tax investigation had been opened about me. So there was one agent. Everybody knows around the world, they've heard of the IRS, and the IRS opened a tax investigation on me, and came up empty, like nothing, because I pay my taxes. And so, but this one man saw my movie, Running the Sahara, and instead of being impressed, he decided to start investigating me. And he really just refused to stop. And, this was 2009, 2010. So everybody in the world knows, the financial crash of 2009. The whole world was suffering, and it was all because of the housing market in the United States. And ultimately, though, I was charged with overstating my income on a home loan application. So the law that I had broken, apparently, was saying that I had more income than I had on a home loan application. And anyway, I ended up going to trial, which almost no one does, because in the United States, if you go to trial against the federal government, you're pretty much going to lose. And ultimately, I did lose. But what's interesting is I was found not guilty of providing false information, but on a technicality, I was found guilty of mail fraud. And what that meant was I had signed something that had false information in it, and I had put it in the mail. And even if I didn't put the information there, I was responsible. So look, long story short, I get sentenced to 21 months in federal prison. And, for this thing, and I was the only person in the United States at the time to be charged with this. And, look, I always say that I had enough fame, I had enough notoriety. I mean, I wasn't famous, but, a lot of people knew who I was, but I also didn't have any money. And so, I don't know what it's like where you are, but here in the US, if you don't have money to defend yourself, it's very difficult if you're charged with a crime. And it's why poor people, go to jail more often than wealthy people. But so I got sentenced to 21 months in federal prison, and my kids, my teenage boys, had to drive me to West Virginia, another state, and drop me off to begin serving a federal sentence. And I think about that day a lot, Luke. It's been it's been going on 8 or 9 years now, but I was sad and I was scared. Anybody would be scared going to prison, but I was really angry. I was pissed off about what had been done to me. And it only took a few days to realize that if I stayed in that place of being angry, I wasn't going to make it. Like, I wasn't going to make it. And so I realized that it didn't matter anymore whether it was fair or unfair. And I think this is the point I like to make to people. There's times in your life where things happen and it's not fair, but you have to figure out what you're going to do with that. So I had to figure out who I was going to be in prison. And so I did what I always do. I started to run. And every day I ran. And even in prison, I ate, as a vegetarian, or as a plant-based person as much as you could in prison. And I took care of myself. And the most fascinating thing happened is, doing all this running every day, people were making fun of me, honestly, because there really weren't many runners in there, a couple. But they kept seeing the way I was evolving. Like, I was mentally, I was just good. Every day I was strong. I was reading books. I was writing in my journal, and I was just doing my thing. And people started to come up to me and say, can you help me? Can you help me be a runner? Even though they'd never run before. Maybe they ran from the police, but they'd never run. And slowly but surely, I began to help people start a running program. And anyway, I ended up having my time there. And when I reached the end of my 21 months and I was leaving, when I got there were maybe 3 runners. And by the time I left, I had a running group of 50 guys. And they were doing yoga with me out there on the softball field, like 3 days a week. And all these people are hugging me and they're telling me, oh, thank you for what you did for me. And I always think back about that moment when the day I left, because people were so generous and thankful for what I did for them. But what they didn't understand is that, what they did for me is what got me through it by helping someone else. And I say it every day of my life. If you can be of service, just like with COVID-19, with diet and nutrition, with fitness, with love and generosity, if you can find a way to be of service to somebody else, especially when your life is hard, you will get so many rewards that you won't believe it. Maybe not financial rewards, but you'll get so many emotional rewards. And look, it wasn't fair. What happened to me wasn't fair. But I was in there with a guy, and I always say this. The second day I was there, I met the guy in the cell next to me, and he was a black guy, and he got 25 years in prison for this tiny amount of drugs, like a tiny little amount. And that reminded me that, I might think it was unfair for me. But if we look at the big picture and we see how other people are being treated, usually we can figure out that we're going to get through it. And so I wouldn't recommend going to prison. That's not a good idea. But in so many ways, it made my life so much better and stronger. And the lessons that I learned there have helped me be a much more fulfilled person today.
There was so much wisdom there, Charlie, and my goodness, I mean, to think that you were riding on the high and all of a sudden to get slapped back down and to rise up again, that's truly inspirational, Charlie, and I'm really honored to be speaking with you. Speaking of strength and commitment, I mean, you just shared with me about this 5.8 global adventure. Has that journey, has that experience in the prison fueled the drive in you for this global adventure? And also maybe can you share what this global adventure is?
Yeah, so I got out, and of course the only thing I knew how to do was just to continue doing what I had been doing. And I will say, I always make the joke that I finally got to write a book because I was in prison, and it made it more interesting. But part of what I did learn while I was locked up was, and it's funny, I tell people all the time, journaling changed my life, because I made a commitment in prison to write every single day, however long, 5 minutes, 5 hours, whatever it was. I made a commitment to write, and I learned how to be a writer. And so I got a chance to write a book when I got out, and a big publisher, Simon and Schuster in the United States, bought the book, and so now it's all over the world. It's interesting, runners. I've sold like 3 times more audio books than I have, print copies, because people like to listen to books, I think. But so I continued. In fact, I went to Ecuador right away when I got out, and I did a race there. I did this icebreaker run across the United States with David Clark, who we talked about earlier, and some other people, and that happened in 2016. And I just committed that I wanted to continue doing this, and I had this idea. Actually, I had the idea while I was in prison. And it was that all of us, you and me and everybody on the planet, goes through these low places and high points, and that's part of life, right? So we're always going on a roller coaster. And I decided, okay, what if I put a physical spin on that? What if I actually physically went from low places to high points? And I started the research again, and the lowest place on the planet is the Dead Sea, and the highest, everybody knows, is Mount Everest. And I decided that I was going to go from the Dead Sea to the top of Mount Everest. And to do that, I actually have to swim across the Dead Sea, run about 2,000 miles across the Arabian Desert. And when I get to the tip of Oman, I have to kayak about 1,000 miles across the Indian Ocean. And when I reach Mumbai, India, I'll mountain bike to the base of Mount Everest. And, then from there, it's only like 3 miles, but it's straight up. So, to the top of Everest. But that's the lowest place in the world to the highest. And it's about 4,600 miles, again, 4,600 miles from the Dead Sea to the top of Everest, but it's actually only 5.8 vertical miles. So from the lowest place in the planet to the highest point on the planet is only less than 10K. It's only 5.8 miles. And we all live in that space. You're in Singapore right now. I'm in the United States, but we are in this tiny little sliver of space that surrounds the planet. And we're all in it together. And I think it's a really good visualization for people to realize how interconnected we are, because the world is full of countries now, United States especially, that is very nationalistic, and it's like we only care about us. We don't care about anybody else. That's how the world feels right now, and this is not true. It's not possible. And so my goal is actually to go from the lowest place on all 7 continents to the highest point on each continent. And last year I started with Africa, and I went 2,500 miles from Djibouti all the way to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. And I was scheduled to be in Australia a couple of months ago, but obviously that didn't happen. So I continue to plan and to to work on my plans. I always knew it was going to take a few years, but thanks to COVID-19, it's taking a little bit longer than I planned. But I think it's this feeling that we all have in the world. Life is hard sometimes, and I always tell people, no matter what, don't make decisions when things are really bad, when things are down here, and don't make decisions when things are really good, because those 2 times, they're not real. Like, they almost don't exist. They're gonna pass. Like the hard times, like right now, they're gonna pass. Maybe not easily, but it's gonna pass. And when things are really good, just like it was for me after the Sahara, that's gonna pass too. And life is just about continuous forward movement, and we just have to keep going. And no matter what happens, it doesn't matter actually what happens to you. It only matters what you do about it.
We're all in this together and we are all ones. We are humankind. I remember hearing a speech by someone, when you actually zoom out and look into space, you can't actually see the borders of the different countries on the maps. We're just Earth, we're humankind. So really, really, and I hope that this whole COVID is a catalyst for change for us to really unite for a different way of living and different way of uniting with nature and each other. So I want to kind of end off with a takeaway piece. How can someone find gratitude in dark moments?
You asked such a good question, and you actually said it perfectly already. And what I encourage people to do, two really, really important things when things are the hardest. And that is be of service. Okay. I love this saying that I say all the time: to keep it, you have to give it away. So if you have a gift, if there's something that you are good at, if there's something that you can help with, you need to use your gift. Because at times like this, when people are afraid, especially, they're scared for their health or for their business or their family, they start to shrink and they get smaller and they try to protect themselves. And yes, you need to protect yourself from getting sick, but that is the time to be of service to someone else, whatever it means. Just like what you're doing with me, it helps me to be able to talk about this because I feel better when I talk about it. And you mentioned gratitude. So making a gratitude list every day, I make one every day. Every day I make a gratitude list because it helps me. Like, and sometimes the gratitude is just, I'm glad I got to run today. Thank you. Or I'm glad that my wife is getting healthy, or whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be complicated, but to make either a mental or a written gratitude list is really important because it makes it real. So even when things are dark and it seems impossible, I've told a lot of stories, but I'm gonna tell one more. So in sobriety, when almost 28 years ago, when I first got sober, in AA, we have sponsors, right? So you're new, and so you try to find a sponsor, and that's a mentor, someone to help you through this process. And my first sponsor was named John, and he was in his 70s. He was this old guy, and I'm 29 years old, and he says, and I said to him, I asked him to be my sponsor, and he said, okay, I'm going to tell you what to do. And I'm like, okay, fantastic. Like, he's got this secret, and he's going to share the secret with me, and I'm going to know how to stay sober, how to live a better life. And he said, okay, come tomorrow, 15 minutes early to the meeting. And I'm like, okay, great. 15 minutes, I'm going to get there. So I show up 15 minutes early. I'm like, okay, what do we do? He's like, you see that over there? The coffee pot? Go make coffee. I'm like, okay. And then what? Like, and then are you going to tell me? He's like, just go make coffee. Then we have the meeting. And then I come back the next day and I make coffee. And I go the next day. And I kind of said, like, what am I doing? Like, how is this helping me? And it took a little while for me to understand that the simple act of doing something like making coffee for other people, 30 other people would come to that meeting every day. And when they showed up, there would be a fresh pot of coffee. And I was being of service. I wasn't changing the world, but I was helping. I was doing something that wasn't just for me. It was for other people. And that was the way that I slowly began to learn the lessons of how to stay sober, how to live a better life, and how to help if you can help other people live a better life, then you yourself will live a better life. That's the way to do it.
Being in service of something greater than you. And I think that's how people find purpose, is just by looking beyond your own boundaries and just helping and serving others. And I think just a final one for all those people that are waiting for the perfect conditions to take action, to find that, that perfect pair of shoes and the Garmin watch and the best headband, what would you say to that person just waiting there and just saying, oh yeah, I need to get this and that first before I take action?
Well, first of all, Koros is the best watch. So I'm just saying, and I'm just kidding. But you bring up a really good point, because people always want to have the right conditions before they start a new nutrition plan or an exercise plan. And you know what I'm getting ready to say, right? What do you like? There's no time, like literally right now, not tomorrow or next week or whatever. And I use the analogy, you don't have kids, right? Do you have kids?
A 3-year-old, actually.
Oh, here's the deal. Before you had kids, right? You want to have this much money in the bank. You want to have this job. You want all these conditions to be just right so that you can now have a kid. It doesn't ever happen. It doesn't happen that way. You have the kid and then you figure it out. And that is the thing. You don't have to be perfect. So if you're starting a new, like let's say you want to start plant-based eating, right? But people are afraid of that. But there's so many experts out there that can help you get started. And you just have to worry about doing it today. You don't have to worry about eating like that for the rest of your life. Tomorrow will happen when it comes. But if you don't make the commitment to go ahead and get started, then you'll never get started. Like there is no perfect time to do something that's going to be any better than right now, this moment. So if you are listening to this and you're thinking about making a big change, don't even start researching. I'm not saying go run a marathon this minute, but put your tennis shoes on and walk out the door and go get some exercise, and then find somebody, find a mentor, find someone that can help you, that you admire, that can help you start this process.
Speaking from this, courage, commitment, resilience, you are the man. Thank you very much for being a part of this summit.
Thank you, Luke. I love what you do. Keep doing it. And you are being of service and you're changing the world. So just keep doing it.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation. A wise man once said, "You make a new life by making new choices." Now, if you know that what you eat matters, if you know that health comes from healthy living, then the time to make new choices is now. And just imagine owning the summit for life. Click the button for more. Maybe you know our stories. Luke and I lost family to cancer, and we wish we would have known sooner what you are learning here today. So please, share the summit, take action, and let's support each other. Thank you. This is Toby and Luke signing off, and we can't wait to see you for the next presentation.